Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Coast to Coast Hockey. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive into everything to do with the Detroit Red Wings. I'm Cameron.
I'm Noel.
And I'm Nick.
Let's get into it.
It was a busy offseason for Yzerman and the Red Wings, bringing in Alex DeBrincat, JT Compher, Jeff Petrie, and Daniel Sprong. More on those guys later. He also brought in Shane Gostisbehere, every Leafs fan's favorite player, Justin Hall, James Reimer from San Jose, Klim Kostin, Christian Fischer, and Alex Lyon.
Now, among the key additions, we also have a ton of subtractions for the Red Wings this offseason. You saw Pius Suter, Philip Zadina, Adam Ernie, Jordan Esterly, Alex Nedeljkovic, among others, leave the team this offseason to make room for those additions we see on the left side there.
A lot of work on the phone for Yzerman this offseason.
Moving into some of the bigger names that Yzerman brought in here, beginning with Alex DeBrincat. This is a young player who's 25 years old, diminutive right winger who's 5'7". He's had two 40-goal seasons in the past, which is pretty impressive for a 25-year-old. But last season, he regressed to 27 goals, kind of sided more on the playmaking side last season. So he's looking to bounce back as a big-time goal scorer with his hometown Detroit Red Wings.
JT Compher has been a consistent third-line center for the Colorado Avalanche for many years now, but due to the absence of Nazem Kadri, he was thrust into a second-line center role last season, and he posted a career year with 52 points in 82 games and was rewarded with a 5-year, $5.1 million contract in the offseason by Yzerman. This is basically the same money that they give to Andrew Kopp, and they saw him flounder last season, so we'll see how he does, but it does provide the Red Wings with some good center depth.
Now, on the defensive side, the Red Wings brought in Jeff Petrie, the Michigan native, on a 2-year retained salary contract as a part of many trades that Jeff Petrie has been part of over the past year or so. Last year, he had an underwhelming year offensively, only 31 points in 61 games, so I could see him taking an extended role, maybe some power play time, but it'd be hard to play behind Mo Seider this year in Detroit, so I really wonder how his offense will do this year.
And then finally, in terms of the biggest rivals here, we got a super underrated player in Daniel Sprong, who is Jeff Merrick from 32 Thought's favorite player. Been known to have a little bit of a man crush on him, so funny tidbit there. But last season, he put up 21 goals as a fourth liner and put up one of the highest goals per time on ice in the NHL, which is just incredible. So to bring him in on a 1-year, $2 million contract is a really good piece of business for Yzerman, which, as we'll get into later, is seeming more and more rare these days. Moving on to the future outlook for the Detroit Red Wings, pretty good prospect pool here. As you'll notice right away, every single player listed is a first-round pick. Simon Edvinsson is a massive defenseman at 6'6". Marco Kasper was their first-round pick in the top 10 from a year ago. Axel Sandin Pellikka was one of the top defensemen in the 2023 draft. Nate Danielson is another big centerman from the WHL. And then Sebastian Cossa is one of the most highly touted Canadian goaltenders coming up at this point in time.
It seems like the Red Wings have been trying to get out of this rebuild for multiple years now, so they do have a lot of draft picks that they can use to facilitate some trades, or they will try and bolster their solid prospect core with some of these picks.
Now on to the prospect spotlight for the Detroit Red Wings. We're looking at 3 of the crop of great prospects that the Red Wings have. Simon Edvinsson, Nate Danielson, and Sebastian Cossa lead the team. First off, we're looking at Simon Edvinsson. This is a player who comes out of Sweden, and at a young age has performed exceptionally well at national tournaments, international tournaments, and in the AHL last year he had a pretty great year, despite being on not the best team in the AHL in Grand Rapids. The projection for Simon Edvinsson would be a top pair defenseman, and I could see him playing along Mo Seider in a few years' time as sort of the top pair in Detroit. But it'll be interesting to see how the next couple years go for his development, where he might be bouncing between the NHL and AHL for the next few years. The second prospect of note is Nate Danielson. This is a 6'2" forward out of the WHL. He has progressed every year that he has played. He, at one point, was putting up pretty miserable numbers, but now he has exceeded a point per game and excelled into a great top center position for his WHL team in the Brandon Wheat Kings. So I expect him either to go back there or make the AHL team if possible for his age. You know, he's a young guy. He's only 18 years old. So this is a great idea of a pick at 9th overall. Some are questioning the pick, but I could see this working out very well for the team as he is a very well-rounded guy despite being so young. The third prospect of note is Sebastian Costa. This is a sort of popular goalie now from Canadian perspectives. We're looking at the guy who was drafted 15th overall in the first round in 2021. Now, as you can see, the league he played in last year was the ECHL, and this might concern some people, but I would push the brakes a bit on that because you're looking at a guy who's only 20 years old. This is a goaltender that had some struggles and has rebounded in every league he's played in besides the struggles in the upper leagues. He struggled in the AHL before he got demoted to the ECHL, but as you can see those numbers there, 2.56 and a 9.13, those are pretty great numbers for an ECHL score, especially for as a rookie. This is a guy that I could see being a great piece to Detroit's future, and he's performed at every level as soon as he's had a few more years to play at those levels. If you look back to his junior days, he kind of bounced onto the scene right away with Edmonton, but Edmonton's such a strong team in the WHL that you kind of give the team credit before you give the goalie credit. So looking forward to him being in the AHL next year, hopefully, as the starter and seeing how much work he can handle, and then working his way up to the NHL in a few years' time, but it will not be next year. You will not see Sebastian Cossa in the NHL next year, unfortunately.
Yeah, I remember at the time, Kosa was such an interesting pick because he went before Jesper Wallstedt, who was like touted as the best goalie from that draft. He went to the Minnesota Wild. So we'll see if that's a mistake down the line. And I also just want to point out the similarities between Edvinsson and Owen Power. Both are 6'6" left shot defensemen that are very good skaters for their size. So that's a bit of a player comparison for Edvinsson that I have.
Moving on to the lineup this season for the Detroit Red Wings, and we're going to start with the forwards here. Starting with that top line, pretty solid top line that gets a lot better with the addition of Alex DeBrincat. Lucas Raymond is a young player who had a bit of a tougher second year than he did a first year, so he's looking to bounce back. Dylan Larkin is a very steady player there at the center, team's captain. Jonathan Bergen is a player who I think is maybe playing a little bit above his weight here. He's a second-year player, didn't have amazing totals last year, but developing pretty nicely for the Detroit Red Wings. JT Compher, the new offseason addition. David Perron, a stable veteran there. And then Robbie Fabry, Andrew Kopp, and Daniel Sprong, to me, is a really solid third line that brings a lot of different elements. Kopp plays a little bit physical, so does Sprong. Fabry's kind of got that high upside offense. And then again, a fourth line that I like as well with Klim Kostin coming from Edmonton, Michael Rasmussen, who I think is a pretty underrated player there, plays physically, has some offensive upside, and Christian Fischer as well, who came from Arizona, and I like there in his time as well. I think one thing to point out here is that even though it's maybe not the best in the league, they do have some pretty good depth at center with Dylan Larkin, JT Compher, Andrew Kopp, and Rasmussen. And then you even have extras like Joe Villano as well, who can take some time down the middle too. And Elmer Soderblom is a guy who came up to the NHL last year, played 21 games, and I think he kind of impressed some people with how far along he is in his development at this point. So, pretty solid forward core.
Moving on to the defensive core, this is where things get quite interesting. There is a lot of salary invested in this D-core, but it is sort of questionable whether this D-core can withstand the NHL offenses around the league. We're looking at a top pair, though, that is surprisingly doing well. You got Jake Wallman and Moritz Seider. This is one of the best analytic defensive pairs in the league. This is best expected goals against in the league, arguably. You look at sites like MoneyPuck.com, they'll be up there in the top of the pairings. But next, you've got Ben Sherratt and Jeff Petrie. Without Jeff Petrie in this lineup, the bottom four could be quite rough for this team. Jeff Petrie coming in serves a big purpose for this team to sort of settle down the D-core. You think Ben Sherratt's there for the physicality. You wonder what the salary is going to be for the future for Detroit when they're paying so much for these defensemen. But whether that's the case or not, we're looking at Shane Gostisbehere and Justin Hall on the third pair. And I really worry for Shane Gostisbehere because of his offensive risk taking. This is a guy that needs a defensive, stout defenseman behind him. And I worry that Justin Hall may not be that person to be able to do that for him. Leafs fans could probably echo that sentiment.
And this is a really intriguing goaltending core here for the Detroit Red Wings. You have Ville Husso, who broke out onto the scene 2 seasons ago, posting great numbers for the St. Louis Blues and signed with Detroit. He had a solid start to the year last year, but kind of fell off near the end. James Reimer is a solid veteran, and Alex Lyon had some good games for Florida last year. He was their starting goalie for the playoffs. So three solid options for the Detroit Red Wings to go to. They see if they ride the hot hand, and hopefully one of them can get hot at the right time and steal some wins for this team.
Moving on from the lineup to some interesting storylines surrounding the Detroit Red Wings headed into this coming season. So the first one here is a pretty big one that should be of concern to all Detroit Red Wings fans, and it's just the fact that Mo Seider and Lucas Raymond, always get that confused. Mason Raymond, old-time player, Vancouver and Toronto, but both had great seasons to start out. And last year, they both regressed. I mean, it's pretty natural for second year players to show a little bit of regression, kind of hit that sophomore wall, as happens a lot. But when you look at Mo Seider, this is a guy who put up 50 points and won the Calder Trophy in his first season, which was just incredible. Last year, he only managed 42, but he still impacted the game in other ways, putting up 207 hits and 190 block shots. So, regardless of whether the points are there, this is a guy that's going to impact the game. Whereas with Raymond, this is a guy who really relies on his offense to contribute. In his rookie season, he put up 23 goals and 57 points. Last year, he only managed 17 goals and 45 points, with the asterisk there that he played 8 less games. But regardless, these are both guys you probably would have projected to really improve last year and not regress.
Yeah, I was one of those guys. I drafted Lucas Raymond in fantasy hockey, and I was really disappointed with his production. He's been given a lot of opportunity in Detroit. His first power play, first line with Dylan Larkin, but just last season couldn't seem to put it together. He bounced around the lineup a bit near the end. So they're really looking for him to take a big step here. He's kind of their big name on the team from the drafts a couple of years ago, one of their blue chip prospects that they were hoping to be a future star in the league. So we'll see if he still has that in him.
Yeah, Lucas Raymond is one of those players that plays very, very well off the puck. He is sort of one of those thinkers on the ice where he's going to see what happens and then react rather than sort of be proactive in the sense. So I think that as he cruises through this NHL time without any sort of competition on his winger sides, I believe that he might sort of falter a bit and sort of maintain a plateau rather than exceed any expectations brought on by management or other players. So it'd be nice to see some more competition this year to sort of like threaten that number one spot from him. As you know, mentioned, he's playing all these great minutes and valuable time that he should be able to produce in, but he just hasn't really taken charge and taken the puck and sort of just pushed it into the net as hard as he can. And you look back to that draft, even you're looking at the next two picks being Jake Sanderson and Jamie Drysdale. Jake Sanderson just signing a huge contract, and Lucas Raymond is by far sort of not really there for a long-term contract at this point. You can't really define his production and define him as a person at this point, but it'd be nice to see him do well next year with some added support on the wings. You also look at Moritz Seider. This is a defenseman that should be exceeding expectations every year, looking to be offensive while also being sort of great body positioning and that number one guy for Detroit. So I really hope that this year, as well as being great defensively alongside Jake Wallman, he can find a good offensive touch.
For me personally, I'm not worried about Mo Seider at all. I know he regressed slightly last year, but I think maybe he got slightly a little overrated based on the projections from his first year, which is understandable just on how good he is. But in my mind, there's no doubt he's going to end up being one of the top 10, possibly even 5 defensemen in the NHL within the next few years. So no concern there. The big one for me is Lucas Raymond. This season, Noel, as you said, he's been put in favorable situations, but this year he's got Alex DeBrincat and Larkin alongside him on that top line. So if he's not able to produce in that situation, it's going to be a massive red flag, and it's going to be time to really evaluate what the long-term projection is for this player.
Yeah, I think he had Kubalik last
Yeah.
year threatening his spot, but now that Kubalik's gone, there's Berggren, and it's not much. So he's pretty safe on that top line, but it's really up to him to stay there.
moving on to our next storyline here, and it's just wondering whether Ville Husso can become the number one goalie that he was projected to be when he signed the contract with Detroit. Last summer, he signed I believe it was a 3-year deal at a cap hit of 4.75. At the time, I personally thought it was a great deal. I still think it has a lot of upside, but this was a player who was coming off of a 919 save percentage in 40 games with the St. Louis Blues. He'd pretty much stolen that starting job out from underneath Jordan Binnington. Uh, the St. Louis Blues, unfortunately for them, had to stick with Jordan Binnington given his contract and the fact that his trade value so diminished. So they had to let Ville Husso go. He ends up in Detroit, but last year he unfortunately regressed back down to earth. He put up a 896 in 56 games. So his first real test as a starter, and he kind of came out flat-footed. So the success of this team until maybe Casa comes into the lineup down the line, but we all know how long it takes for goalies to develop. So I wouldn't count on that for another few years at least. Their success is directly tied to how well Ville Husso can perform.
Yeah, I do agree with that, but they do have solid options behind. So even if Husso does struggle a bit, they can turn to other goalies and have some quality pieces there. But again, he's the highest paid goalie between those three, and you'd want him to start. So they're really hoping for him to be able to take a step forward from his previous troubled season.
Yeah, and I think that for Husso, the biggest thing this year is going in with a little more security, knowing that he can play a few less games. I think that
Yeah.
playing 56 games is quite a lot to ask, and I think going into the last season, he probably was trying to get ready for that himself, and the fatigue and sort of getting like that split second slower to every shot railroad passes or anything like that is going to take your numbers and put them down the drain. So I think that playing less games this year, hopefully, with options like Reimer and Lyon backing him up, will help him personally and professionally.
Yeah, for sure. I think bringing in those two guys really solidified the goaltending because even if he falters, like you said, Noel, they got some good options there as well. So should be a bit better than last year regardless, but he's supposed to be the number one guy. We'll have to see if he can live up to it. Finally, the last storyline we have here is the famous Yzerplan. Uh, is it all it's cracked up to be, really? Like I think a lot of people, there's been a lot of, you could call them Iser stands, I guess you could say. A lot of people really love to toot this guy's horn. He made some unreal moves in Tampa. He completely constructed that team that went on to win the Stanley Cup the next year. So it's similar to a situation with Dale Talon in Chicago where builds the team and leaves the year before they win. But in terms of his recent track record in Detroit, I mean, I think I think a lot of people are fond of his draft picks. They think he's made some good draft picks. But in terms of the contracts he's signed, like just to list some of them off here, last summer he signed Andrew Kopp to 5 years at 5.625 million. This year he signed JT Compher at 5 years for 5.1 million. Last year he signed Ben Sherratt at 4 years for 4.75 million. And he also decided to throw 3.4 million for 3 years at Justin Hall, who, as a Leafs fan, I mean, I definitely think he got some unwarranted flack from Leafs fans, but just the eye test with this guy does not add up. A lot of points during the season, this is a guy I think could have been in the AHL. At the best, he's a good fifth, sixth defenseman on an NHL team, and the Detroit Red Wings are going to be paying him 3.4 million for the next 3 years. Just a total head scratcher there. And then also acquiring Kailer Yamamoto and buying him out immediately. Kailer Yamamoto is a guy who has some upside and didn't have a crazy high cap hit. A team with cap space. I don't know why Detroit didn't take a flyer on him instead of paying him 500K against the cap for the next 2 years not to play for him. A lot of really questionable decisions. I know this is something that Nick, you feel pretty strongly about here as well.
Yeah, I guess I'll chime in for a little bit here. It's sort of when you put someone on a pedestal, it's hard to sort of let them come off. Yzerman has put great success into teams, and then those teams have flourished, such as we've talked about Tampa Bay Lightning and their success. They are also, I guess, gifted, but also talented for being able to draft players such as Nikita Kucherov in later rounds. But you're looking at his sort of legacy tailing off a bit in Detroit. We really wanted to see Detroit become sort of a super team, or it's the biggest free agent signing coming to Detroit, or drafting somebody that would blow the world off. And we thought that might be coming with Lucas Raymond, maybe because people were unsure about that draft pick, and he has sort of met the expectations that people thought he was originally going to meet, being sort of like a plateau, low ceiling, high floor guy. But you're looking at a lot of signings that are sort of trying to, you know, put a band-aid on a bullet hole at this point. This is a team that is not destined for greatness as of this point, but maybe they flip a couple coins and they land and they get lucky. So it's just something that the faithful are getting less faithful, is what I can say about that.
Yeah, Detroit has been mid for a long time, and you would really expect them at this point to be fully emerging out of this rebuild. I don't know if that's outlandish to say, if you guys think that's rushed, but uh, I don't know how much faith I personally have in Yzerman anymore. I mean, the most cited draft pick was way off the board, and it ended up working out great for the Red Wings. So maybe he sees something in these players that we don't see. I mean, he is an NHL GM after all, and we're just bums on the internet giving our giving our takes. But I'm losing faith in the Yzerplan. I think that Justin Hall signing is the nail in the coffin for me.
To me, the most peculiar part of it is this is a guy who took over the team from Ken Holland, who put this team in cap hell, and Yzerman had to come in and clean up his mess because Ken Holland threw so much money at a bunch of, like Noel said, mid players to try and keep this playoff streak going that they had for so many years there. Yzerman came in and did a pretty good job cleaning up that cap sheet, and now he's filling it with guys like Ben Sherratt, Andrew Kopp, who are all drastically overpaid for the role that they play on a good team. So if some of these young players' contracts come up and he has to re-sign them, and he has to say, sorry, I gave $5 million to Andrew Kopp, he's going to not look very good.
He's throwing a whole lot of money at a whole lot of mid as well, too. Like that Andrew Kopp and JT Compher, they're very comparable players,
Yeah.
paying both of them $5 million each a year. And like they can't carry the line. They have players around them that are able to do carry like share some of that load. Like you saw JT Compher do really well in Colorado last year, but that's some of the top six of Colorado that he was playing in. So can you really compare Detroit's top six to Colorado with JT
Not at all.
Compher as the second line center? Like it's just a whole lot of mid going on in Detroit.
Yeah, and if for fans that are looking for sort of an instant gratification of the Yzerplan, this year's not going to come. We're talking about this team very soon in our series, so that can infer that we're seeking that they're going to be pretty low in the standings again, which is a tough ticket to sell to fans next year. Maybe in 3 to 4 years, once the players like Casa, Edvinsson, once these guys become sort of the premier options for this team, maybe that will help the team sort of have a bright spot to their team. But for now, we're looking at a team going into next season that, again, people are less faithful about.
The
Just
DeBrincat move was really good though in the
it
signing. I do
was
got to commend
great
him for
move.
that.
Absolutely, there
Strong
are.
too.
It's a mixed bag in
Okay,
overall.
Jeff Merrick.
Yeah, Daniel Sprong and Alex DeBrincat are players that will shine on most teams that they play for. It's just kind of curious to see the selection of players that they're adding to this team, and some sort of hidden synergy that maybe we find out later in the year that these guys are former whatevers they've played in college together, maybe, or there's a reason why these guys are selected together. But it seems like they have a lot of third and second lines rather than sort of a
Yeah.
dominant option.
I I also think the Jake Wallman signing, getting him re-signed under $4 million was a good move as well. But at the end of the day, I think one of the most questionable parts about this is just the fact that the Atlantic Division is so stacked, and to bring in all these guys, like the signings in themselves aren't bad. It's simply the term. Andrew Kopp at $5 million for a team that's not expected to be good is stomachable, but in 3, 4 years, when you have young guys who are going to be knocking at the door looking for more money, it might really come back to haunt them. Uh,
Yeah. How
but
much do you pay Mo Sider in 1 year next
exactly,
offseason?
based on the Jake Sanderson contract, you'd have to think more than that. So
Yeah, so if he's getting 8 million and you only have 5 million of cap space going into this season, with a lot of guys locked up
yeah,
for a few years, what do you see happening next summer?
exactly. He's like I said, he cleaned up a mess and then made one of his own. So hopefully it works out here though, and that'll lead us into our final segment here. just a broad overview for the Detroit Red Wings heading into the 2023-24 season. So the offseason grade, you could probably tell from the way we just talked about it, it's going to be a C. I believe that's the lowest one we've given out. It's just really comes down to the term on these contracts. I don't hate the players, maybe aside from Justin Hall, but but honestly, it's just the term on these contracts is really gonna come back and haunt this team in a few years. And for the sake of Detroit fans who have had to endure a lot since that last great playoff run, I hope not, but only time will tell. In terms of the on ice grades, we gave them a B for offensive strength. I think they have a pretty well-rounded offensive group, especially in that bottom six. I think they only have one player maybe playing out of position on the second line. But aside from that, pretty well-rounded team that can probably roll four lines. Defensive strength is probably where they're weakest. I'm going to give them a C plus there. Mo Seider's great, but when you have Jeff Petrie and Ben Sherratt as your second pair, that's not great. But it's better than it was last year. So that's at least a positive. Goaltending strength, we're going to give a B minus. This could easily go up if Ville Husso emerges again to his old self. But as of right now, they do have some great depth there. So that's why it's in the B range. But a lot of these guys can't be really counted on for long stretches of time. So we'll see there. And then the future outlook is going to be an A minus. This could possibly be higher considering they have Mo Seider, one of the best young defensemen in the NHL, and one of the deepest prospect pools as well. But we're going to stick at A minus right now. It's kind of a wait and see game with guys like Lucas Raymond and some of those other guys. So
Yeah, we've all been expecting Detroit to take a step out of this rebuild each year, the next year, expecting them to get better. But with how stacked the Eastern Conference is, and more particularly the Atlantic Division is, we just can't really put them any higher than seventh in the Eastern Conference standing. So that's where we have them for this year, hoping that the trio of the goalies will be able to carry them a bit, and also the addition of Alex DeBrincat. We're hoping that'll have a big impact on this team.
to wrap things up here, our individual standings for Detroit. Nick had them 26th overall. Noel had them 27th. I personally had them 23rd. Guys, thanks so much for watching. Follow us on Twitter at CTC_hockey. Thanks again so much for watching. We really appreciate it. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next one.